All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Adam Reifstek, and I'm the host and technical assistant for this webinar. I'm a composer and producer and a member of Musicians for Musicians, and also the co-host of our podcast, MFM Speaks Out. And I want to thank you for joining our Zoom webinar, Music is Essential series. Today is our guest speaker, Banning Eyre, and who's also a member of MFM's advisory committee. And Banning is an author, guitarist, photographer, and senior producer for the Peabody Award-winning public radio series, Afropop Worlwide. His work has taken him to over 25 African countries to research local music. And he's produced over 180 Afropop episodes, including the in-depth coverage of Mali, Congo, Egypt, Ghana, Lebanon, Madagascar, and Nigeria. And in 2015, Duke University Press published his fourth book, Lion Songs, Thomas Mapfumo, and The Music That Made Zimbabwe, which won the 2016 Society for Ethnomusicology African Music Section Book Prize. So he co-produced also a film in 2004 film, Festival in the Desert, and filmed on location in Mali. And you can check out more at afropop.org and banningeyre.com, which is also the home of his independent label, Lion Song Records. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Banning.
Thanks, Adam. That's a nice introduction. So what I'm going to do today is basically talk about the work with Afropop Worldwide, which is it's been a rich adventure. The show was created by Sean Barlow. We met at Wesleyan University right here in Middletown, Connecticut in the 1970s, and were introduced to a lot of global music. At the time I was playing classical guitar and didn't know a whole lot about African music at all. But we got quite an education, and he really took the bull by the horns and started traveling there and collecting music. And long story short, he won funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to start this radio show. And originally it was just going to be a 13-part series. And they said, well, do you think you could stretch it out to 39 shows and then we could run it for a whole year? I mean, it's the kind of thing that doesn't happen very often. But it did then, and here we are 34 years later, and the show is still on the air. So what I'm going to do is take you through some of the story of the research and share some anecdotes and mostly images. I'm going to do this in three parts. The first part will be a narrated slideshow telling the story of Afropop. Then I'm going to share with you some choice video clips from some of the research just to kind of take you inside the music a little more. And then I'll play a little guitar at the end to sort of share with you my passion for actually playing African guitar music, which is pretty much taken over my musical life. I started playing guitar when I was 13 and went through many phases. But once I hit the African stuff, that's pretty much where I stayed. So let's see, and then at the end we'll have questions if people want to explore certain things. So I'm going to cover a lot of different areas, and if people want to know more about particular things, there's plenty to chew on, and especially if you go to afropop.org and dig into the actual programs. So with that, I will start the narrated slideshow. So Afropop, the way I got into this is that I wasn't really working for the program at first. Sean and I were very good friends, and he was turning me on to a lot of stuff, and but I had a different life. And before the show went on the air in 1987, he asked me if I wanted to go along on one of the field trips. and we were going to go to both of the Congos, then the Republic of Congo and Zaire, as it was known at the time, to also South Africa and then Zimbabwe. And the experience was totally mind-blowing as a way, literally as a way of writing it off on my taxes. I reached out to some publications, including Guitar Player magazine, and said, would you be interested in stories? And the Boston Phoenix and Guitar Player magazine took me up on that. So I brought my guitar and did a lot of interviews with guitarists and wrote some stories when I got back. And this is 1988 now, before the show went on the air, which was October of 88. And it was just a time when a lot of record labels were starting to release African music. It had really broken in Europe, Paris, London, some years earlier, at least 5 years earlier. Graceland had happened, and so there was a lot of energy flowing into the music market then in the U.S. And so I started getting all these offers to write about this and cover that, and then, you know, the music just started pouring in, and eventually it kind of took over my life, and I started working full on for Afropop. All right, so that's a bit of my story, but I'm going to take you now to some places. These are we used to call them the Afropop twins. These guys are now in their late 30s, and they still constantly write to me asking for things. They're from Bamako, Mali, where I lived for a while researching a book. So here is Sean and Georges Collinet, our host, and George is quite a celebrity in Africa. He had a show on the Voice of America called Bonjour l'Afrique, where he basically played American pop music for Francophone Africa. And he was incredibly popular, really a sensational link for young Africans to the world of American music. Here he is being received at the airport in Bamako. He has a funny story about this moment. It was actually somewhat terrifying, this huge crowd that had come to greet him. But for us, this was a tremendous asset because we would carry letters from him that basically introduced us. And it opened doors, oh my God, especially in Francophone Africa. The fact that he was associated with us was an incredible blessing. Here he is in our studio. And basically at that time, I mean, you think back to the late 80s, early 90s, which I think of as a golden era of African popular music being presented on American stages. So many presenters, festivals, record labels, promoters, managers were just jumping into this thing because they were imagining that, I mean, some of the labels were imagining they were going to find the next Bob Marley. Island Records thought it would be this guy, King Sunny Ade. And but there was money. It wasn't that expensive or difficult compared to now to tour these artists. So big bands came. Sunny Ade would come with 17 musicians and just blow people away. So they started to build this audience, and we were really in the right place at the right time. We were on some 200 stations at our height then. We're on about 100 now, but there's many other places people can go to learn about and hear African music. We were pretty much the only one for quite a while, especially on the national stage. So we had really great access to the top stars, people like King Sunny Ade, Angelique Kidjo from Benin, who's still she's probably the predominant African pop musician right now of our time. She's won 9 or 10 Grammys. Incredible range of work, just a total dynamo, an activist, just a rabble-rouser in every way, and a fantastically talented composer and collaborator. The Mahatela Queens from South Africa playing bakanga music from the 1960s that you can't even find it now. And we were very lucky. Here they are at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. And of course, this was the time of Fela Kuti, who probably everyone knows from the Broadway show. I only interviewed him once. Sean interviewed him in person once, and I interviewed him over the phone. And I listened to it recently. It's tragic. You can barely hear him. He's in a hotel room, half asleep, and he's just like muttering these answers I can barely decipher. But anyway, we did see him. I did see him live twice or two or three times. Once in Boston, a couple of times in New York, and amazing experience. This is his youngest son, Sheun, who is now big on the scene. Here he is at Central Park Summer Stage a couple of years ago. Nigeria, big story, but at that time it was Juju music and Afrobeat, Fela Kuti and King Sunny Ade and their ilk that we saw on American stages. Umu Sangare from Mali, the creator, not the creator, but the popularizer of Wassoulou music, an incredibly funky, bluesy, beautiful melodic music from southern Mali. Also an incredible force in music, an activist, an entrepreneur, and a friend to us. Thomas Mapfumo here in Harare, Zimbabwe, and as you'll see later, he became a massive obsession for me. I wrote a book about him. It took 20 years. I'm glad it's over. It was amazing. Ali Farka Touré, the great Malian bluesman here in Seattle, having a little jam with Bonnie Raitt, who we once took to Mali in 2000 with a group of listeners and had a fantastic experience of traveling around the country, and she just loved the fact that nobody knew who she was and she could just blend in and jam with people and have fun. Ali died in 1997. God, was it really that long ago? And there's now a statue for him in Bamako. This was when it was first erected. Right now it's a completely different color. It's covered in dust, but as everything is in Bamako. But that just gives you a sense of what a towering, literally, figure he is for Malians. And Salif Keita, who Sohrab knows. I've actually seen Sohrab on the stage with Salif. This is at the Apollo Theater in New York. An unbelievably dynamic singer, probably the most successful Malian singer ever, and with a fascinating story, being albino, having come from a very noble family where you're not supposed to sing, and yet this incredible career going all the way back to the late 60s, but in the 80s when he moved to Paris, he made an album called Sorrow that just broke open the whole idea of fusing traditional African music with rock, jazz, making very progressive, complex, well-produced music that became the norm for so many artists. So just a fascinating figure and a tremendous artist. This is a picture from Cuba. I put it there only to mention the fact that we started the show in 1988, but by a couple of years later, we realized that while there was this incredible richness of music on the continent, it really was impossible to limit the subject matter to just the African continent. There was so many stories to tell in the Caribbean, South America, the Middle East, European cities. So we made it Afropop Worldwide, and we started covering we basically broadened the scope of the subject matter so much that it was going to be inexhaustible. One of our great colleagues, Ned Sublett, who some of you may know, a musician, scholar, fabulous author, real Renaissance man, he produced a series of 20 Afropop programs, which you can find on our website, called the Cuban Connection, and it's just a rich trove of traditional and pop recordings that he made and gathered in Cuba over many, many trips mostly during the 1990s, up to the point when George Bush closed down that possibility. So we did a lot of great field work in Africa, and it was, as I said, just a completely intoxicating experience. This is me interviewing Pepe Calais in a hotel room in Kinshasa, Congo, on that very first trip. And also from that trip, here is recording traditional panpipe and gorombe music in Zimbabwe near the Mozambican border, with our tried and true Shure stereo microphone there, which can make unbelievably, just recordings with tremendous fidelity and imaging, where you can just place each. And I was somewhat in ecstasy here, holding that mic in amongst all those voices and shakers and panpipes, and being able to hear each one just in its place. Beautiful recording. Here's Sean doing an interview in a studio in the Republic of Congo on that first trip. Notice the cassette recorder and the vinyl. This was actually at a vinyl pressing plant. He was learning we were learning how vinyl was made. Vinyl was still the thing then. Cassettes had just barely come in, and CDs were just a gleam in somebody's eye, a dark one. But anyway, that's another story. So shortly after that first trip, Sean moved from Washington, D.C. to New York City, to Brooklyn. And for 30 years, we had an office and an apartment in Brooklyn, so that was really our center. And we had a pretty strong presence in New York City. Here, we often would have a table like this at shows at Central Park Summer Stage and Celebrate Brooklyn, and we reached out to the community to get people to sign up for our newsletter and come to our website. And yeah, that banner is now hanging in front of the house here in Middletown. It's it's retired for the moment. George and I developed a tradition at some point of doing a roundup of the best music of the year. We'd go down to D.C. for Thanksgiving. He lives in D.C. and go into his studio there, the Syncopated Lair, and just sample the best music that we'd heard that year and talk about it. And those shows, which we called stocking stuffers in those days, were very popular. We were basically in this function being curators, because so much music was being released in the 90s and the early 2000s, still now, but the flood then was just unbelievable. And we were also catching up with, you see George's vinyl collections, amazing. Ours isn't bad either, but he's been at it a lot longer, because after he worked for the VOA, he went and lived in Paris and became a broadcaster there, and a real advocate for African musicians in the 70s and early 80s, when they were really just first finding their footing in Paris and London and Brussels. And he had a whole other kind of career and sort of persona as a promoter and friend of African music that he basically just channeled right into his role as the host of Afropop. And then, as was mentioned in the intro, our proudest moment was winning the Peabody Award in 2015, where this is Sean and I and Michael Jones, our engineer. The only reason George is not there is because he had an accident just the day before and was just indisposed, couldn't make it, but that was a bit tragic. But anyway, he was definitely, he should have been there, but that's us feeling the vibe for him. So along the way, before I got into writing about music, when I graduated from Wesleyan, I actually wanted to be a novelist, and I wrote 2 failed novels that never went anywhere. But I had that urge to write stories and to develop characters and really get beyond the kind of writing that you do as a music journalist, which was great and fun, and it opened all these doors, and I loved it. But I always had this idea that I wanted to go deeper. So on one of my early trips, I came up with the idea of writing books. And the idea was that I would take my guitar and go stay in a place for a longer period of time, 6 months, and really immerse myself in the music world, get to know people, use the process of learning traditional guitar styles as a way of getting close to people and learning more about what really made them tick, and the culture and the history and all that. And so this was the first of those books, In Griot Time, An American Guitarist in Mali, which was basically, it's a portrait of a musical city. It's not really a memoir. It's not about me. It's about all these guitarists and musicians that I was privileged to hang out with, including some of the great stars of Mali. This man is Jelimadi Tunkara, who was the lead guitarist is still, even though the band is somewhat defunct now, of the Super Rail Band, which is a legendary Bamako band that played at the train station in Bamako. And they were kind of having a bit of a revival during the time I lived there, which was 1995 and 96. And so I basically walked in his shoes for that period of, I think it was 7 months before it became so hot, even much hotter than it is now, that I couldn't take it anymore. But it was a fantastic experience of moving between these traditional settings, weddings, baptisms, where he'd be playing behind griot singers who would be praising all the people at the wedding and being showered with money by people. Griots is a huge subject that we could talk about another time, but they're some of the best paid, at least at this time, they were some of the best paid musicians in Africa because they were so valued for their oratorial skills and for their function at public events, family celebrations, weddings, baptisms especially. So we had that, and then we'd had the Super Rail Band, which was playing for this sort of elite clientele in Bamako, adapting reggae and jazz and Latin music mixed with various traditional forms of Malian music. And it was just an incredible education for me to do that. And then in the evenings also, my favorite part is we would just sit out on the street after sunset when it was cooling off with our guitars and just, it was not really like lessons. It was more just absorbing things as they came out. He would show me stuff. He wanted to teach me, but it was not in no way a systematic lesson situation. And it was often very difficult for me to get him to slow anything down so that I could actually understand it. But I still have many cassettes from that time, and anytime I sit down with one of them, it just takes me right back there, and I realize still how much I have to learn. The way this all started was he said to me, first time we met, I was there for a month in 1993, and he taught when I first got there, he was one of the first people I met, and he showed me something. And then by the end of the time, when I'd been doing a lot of other things, I came back and showed him that I could kind of play it. And he was impressed. He said, if you came here and stayed for 6 months, I could teach you to play like I do. And that idea just stuck in my brain. And so I did it. Of course, he was wrong. I still couldn't play anything like him. But it really did a lot for me because it satisfied this urge I had to write more deeply about characters and events and places and still have it really centered around music. And I'm happy to say that a lot of people who read this book were inspired by it and went to Mali and other places to do similar things. A few years later, I was approached by what was it even called? What are they even called? The Guitar Workshop. I can't even remember the exact name. But they work with Alfred Publishing to do these instructional books. And so I did a series of introductory lessons to African guitar styles. And they really dragged me to it kicking and screaming. I did not want to fuss with transcribing and all that kind of stuff. But again, I'm very glad I did it because a lot of people used this book, and now there are much more effective ways of learning African guitar. There's a fantastic online service called the World Music Method, where you can take these online lessons with incredible guitarists, and you can slow things down and loop things and look at it from different angles. It's incredible. But this book served a great purpose in terms of just like putting the idea of African guitar on the map, and it still sells a bit. And then the big work was this one, Thomas Mapfumo, and the music that made Zimbabwe. I mentioned that we went to Zimbabwe on that very first trip, and for those who don't know anything about Thomas Mapfumo, he's really an iconic figure. I would say on a par with Fela Kuti, although he's much less known and celebrated internationally. But he came up as a rock and roll singer. He lived in the countryside with traditional music when he was a kid. He came to the city and got into rock and roll in the late 60s, around the time when the whole liberation struggle was boiling up in then southern Rhodesia. And in the mid-70s, he came up with this idea of adapting traditional music, particularly the music of the mbira, which we'll talk about a little later, so often referred to as a thumb piano, although mbira players hate that term. They say, well, if you're going to call it that, well, I'm going to call your guitar a finger harp. They really don't like the idea of in order for you to understand their traditional instrument, you have to translate it into a European instrument. Anyway, lamellophone is the technical term, but that also doesn't quite satisfy. It's a tricky thing. So it's mbira. But anyway, he took that music, put the rhythms on the trap set, broke down the lines into guitar lines, and sang songs that were very allegorical and full of parables, and really basically set up the whole. They captured the whole mentality of the liberation struggle, and many people were inspired by his songs to go and join the guerrilla fighters in Zambia and Mozambique next door. And so he was like a folk hero, the soundtrack of the revolution. But a lot of things happened after that. His reputation was somewhat tarnished right at the end of the war, when he was arrested and forced to play at a rally for the fellow named Archbishop Muzorewa, who had tried to make a sort of a halfway settlement to independence. And of course that failed. Real independence came. Mapfumo reestablished his reputation quite quickly, and then just became the biggest pop star in the country for a decade at least, and gradually soured on the administration that had come in, the liberation government, and became one of the only artists who was willing to criticize their corruption and mismanagement and lack of coming through on promises. And so the hero of the revolution gradually became persona non grata, and life became more and more difficult for him until the early 2000s, when he went into exile, and he now lives in Eugene, Oregon. But by that time, he had released, some 30 albums, including many songs that dramatically affected the flow of events in Zimbabwe. Plus, he invented this incredibly beautiful style of music that combined mbiras, guitars, brass section, singers and dancers, percussion. It was like a folk orchestra, and to me, every bit as kinetic and beautiful and original as King Sunny Ade's Juju music, or Franco's OK Jazz in Congo, or Fela Kuti. So I wrote this book. Originally, the idea was that I was going to tell the story of Zimbabwe through his story, and kind of give him the place that he deserved. But when I started writing in the late 90s, things just kept happening. The events were so dramatic that it took me until 2015 to actually get the book through the door. So that's another long story for another time, but I think this is my proudest achievement, this book. So, but along the way, for me, what was actually the greatest pleasure was actually playing with musicians. This is from an event that happened just a couple of years ago it was a tribute to Memphis Mini, and this is me and Abdoulaye Al Hassan Touré from Niger, who lives in New York, doing an Africanized version of a Memphis Mini song. And here's playing with Yakubu Sissoko, who may even be on the call. I don't know if he is, but he's a great friend, a terrific kora player who's worked with everybody from Paul Simon to Yo-Yo Ma. And we play in a trio called Voyagers with a saxophonist from Austria, Edith Lettner. And just before the pandemic, we recorded a CD that's finally going to come out on my little label, Lion Songs Records, in the fall. So watch out for that. But, you know, in New York, it's just amazing the level of talent of some of the African musicians who live there, who are more visible now, but for so long they just were completely not visible. I think Sylvain is still here. He's been a champion of these musicians and getting them onto New York stages and into different contexts, and it's a much different scene now than it was when Sylvain got started doing that. But New York's richness in the talent of African musicians who've come to live there is extraordinary. This is an amazing moment of playing with Wendell Kolosoy, who was one of the originators of Congolese rumba. First hit in 1949. He's been dead at least 15 years now, but there was a time when I connected with him as I went there to cover the making of a record, and when they saw I could play, I started getting invited to play, and I had a couple of wonderful occasions of playing with this classic group. This is playing at a wedding in Bamako in 2016 with the great singer from Timbuktu, Eyre, who died just a couple of years ago. And here we mentioned the film of the festival in the desert. This was a moment when Afel Bokoum, who was the sideman and protege of Ali Farka Touré, was doing a show, and he invited me to get up and play a song with them, which was great. Here's one of the many times I've had the privilege of playing with Thomas Mapfumo. This was in New York at just a few years ago at the Winter Garden. So I mentioned the mbira. There it is, and I put it at this point in the slideshow as a kind of a symbol of the kind of music that Afropop Worldwide championed and still champions, which took many, many varieties, especially when you consider the diaspora, South America, the Middle East. But the really central motivating thing, one of the central ideas that transcends everything, was the idea of taking really old traditions, which this instrument clearly represents, and modernizing them, making them part of the contemporary conversation. And up until about, the early 2000s, that meant putting them with drums, bass, keyboards, brass, electric guitar, which was my passion, but basically fusing it with rock and jazz and dance music and all of the things that were happening. Now, of course, by that time, hip-hop was what had come to fruition. I mean, you think when we start, hip-hop existed, but it wasn't the worldwide force that it was by the year 2000. And what started to happen was a whole new generation of artists, young artists born in the 90s and even the 80s, and up to the 2000s. And they have championed a whole new generation of music that is quite radically different than that whole motivation that I've just described. This was not music about revalorizing traditional music. It was about claiming a place at the higher echelons of international pop. And this music goes by various names, but the most common one is Afrobeats, which is an inherently confusing term because it's taking the name of Fela Kuti's music, which was more in line with sort of Yoruba music meets James Brown big band music, very funky, lot of musicians, this sort of, and very political, very strong engagement with calling out corruption, calling out misdeeds of every sort, and in a very brash and just forthright and brave way, and he paid a terrible price for it. Some DJs in London were trying to describe this new kind of music that was coming out that's much more influenced by R&B, hip-hop, dancehall, reggae. Those would probably be the three biggest ones. And using African rhythms, definitely, a few in particular, not a huge vocabulary of them, but certain ones that were just very dance-oriented. And so they dubbed it Afro beats by putting that S there. And it's a term that is now, you can't avoid it. It's everywhere. But it's very problematic. It confuses people, and like so many genre names when they're young, it's controversial. A lot of people don't like it. But anyway, it is, when you see Afrobeat or Afrobeats, you always have to be careful. Are they talking about fela without the S, or this new stuff? The Nigerians like to call their music Niger pop. A lot of people. What's very interesting to us is that throughout our career, the word that everyone heard was world music. Probably the most commonly used and universally despised genre name there ever was, because it's meaningless. World music. I mean, I always remember Ben Mandelson's comment, world music is local music not from here. It applies wherever you are. But similarly, a lot of African musicians did not like being lumped under the label of Afropop, because they were playing chimarenga music or sukus or mbalach or highlife or juju or any number, marabenta, any number of very specific, very well, formed and distinctive genres, and to have them all sort of lumped together they didn't necessarily like it. But the funny thing is that now that people are rebelling against this term Afrobeats, you have this whole new generation of artists who are eagerly embracing the term Afropop in order to distinguish themselves from this. So it's just a fascinating and funny story about how genre names, evolve from their birth. But anyway, these artists are phenomenally successful. This is WizKid performing in Brooklyn a few years ago. WizKid, Drake had him collaborate on a song, and that was just the beginning of this huge breakthrough. He's an international superstar. He's playing at Celebrate Brooklyn in September. I just heard, but I think it's a paid fundraising show. But this guy, fills huge stadiums all over Africa, and he's just one of a whole generation of incredibly successful artists. They say that in Nigeria, which of course is a land of tremendous income inequality, where in the past all the rich people were either politicians or oil merchants or whatever, musicians didn't even begin to rate. Nowadays, people like WizKid, Davido, there's a number of others, are literally among the richest citizens in the country. And this is because of a completely different economic model. This is another subject which we could go on and on about, and I won't dwell on it, but it starts with corporate sponsorships from cell phone companies, alcohol companies, clothing companies, whatever it might be. It goes then to official gigs sponsored by governments that are loaded with money. And then to these huge satellite TV shows and competitions, video competitions, musical competitions that cover. Well, I'm just going to talk specifically about Anglophone Africa, because this is Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania. That's a huge market. That is a massive, massive market. And in the past, the artists we came up with did not have anything like that kind of market to deal with, Juju music was popular in Nigeria and in small enclaves in Europe and America, period. Thomas Mafumo Chimarenga music, even smaller, Congolese music, because it was the most popular dance music in Africa in the 70s and 80s. Those guys did better, but they lived in Mobutu's Congo, so they had other problems. But none of those musicians could put a finger to the kind of money that these artists make. It's a dramatic change, and we feel it because they're so big, and the world is so different now. It's very hard for us to get interviews with these guys. It's nothing. We used to be invited into the homes of Youssou N'Dour and Salif Keita and all that. We were a big deal then. It's a much different story now. Here's Afia and Stonebwoy, two other very big artists from Ghana and Nigeria. Tiwa Savage, enormous, tremendous artist also. There are many others. I just wanted to mention that this new generation, and we're facing a very interesting challenge now as a show. I'll just mention this at this point because it's a message that I'm always trying to get out, which is that we're pretty long in the tooth. The producers that we work with, that we have worked with, incredibly talented people with a lot to share, tremendous knowledge of history and musical history, and how to tell really powerful radio stories. But we need young producers to come along. First of all, more diverse, more women, more people of color, but also just a stronger connection with this whole new generation of artists who are completely transforming the story that we have been telling. And we want them to stand on our shoulders and take this thing forward. So if you know anyone who would be interested in producing a radio show, producing a podcast, writing, doing interviews, anything like that, send them our way, because we're all about mentoring and developing the people who can take us forward. Okay, so that's my first part here, the narrated slideshow. And now I want you to hear a little bit of an Afropop show. By the way, Afropop is on in New York City every single day from 11 till midnight and from 5 till 6 in the morning, not on the public radio station where we used to be, but on 91.5? 90.5. No, 91.5. Yes, sorry. 90.5 is here. 91.5 Radio New York. Tune in at 11 any night. You may hear a show from 10 years ago with promoting websites that don't exist anymore, but the music will blow you away. Definitely do that. So I'm going to play you just the intro of a show, just to give you a sense of what it's like. This is a show about one of my favorite places, Madagascar, and particularly about a music from southern tip, southeastern Madagascar, called Sapik. And this will just give you this is a little clip from Afropop Worldwide.
Now there's the groove to get you moving, pumped up with the driving beat of South African township pop. But how about that fancy fingerstyle guitar work? Well, let me tell you, there's only one place in the world they play guitar like that. Madagascar. Hello, Georges Collinet with you on Afropop Worldwide from PRI, Public Radio International. Today we bring you a hip-deep field excursion to the south of Madagascar. The music we're hearing is called Sapik. It's rowdy and joyous party music. It's also a deep expression of culture and spirituality for people in southwest Madagascar, all around the coastal city of Tuléar.
Le Tsapik, c'est vraiment le drapeau de Tuléar. It's like a flag of Tuléar.
That's French ethnomusicologist Julien Mallet declaring Tsapik the flag of Tuléar. Julien is now living in Madagascar, researching his second book on Tsapik. He calls it a young music, and that's true. Tsapik's history goes back only to the late 1970s. Funny thing though, for such a young music, people don't seem to agree much about its origins.
The rhythm Tsapik is a story of a bird. You know the big bird?
That's our old friend Sami of the group Tarika Sami. He says Tsapik is an imitation of the movement of a large bird, something like an ostrich that once lived in the south of Madagascar.
Le Tsapik, ça vient de l'accordion de tribu masco.
And that's guitar virtuoso Gary, who began his career playing Tsapik music in Tuléar. He says the style borrows from the accordion music of the Masikuru people.
Dans toutes mes recherches, pour tous les musiciens de Tsapik, pour tous les gens, ce nom-là n'a pas de sens.
Julien Mallet has heard a lot of theories about Tsapik, including the origin of the word itself. Some say it comes from the French sapik. It stings, like a mosquito biting you, forcing you to dance. Well, we may not know how Tsapik got its name, but we know a lot about the artists and communities who have made this fantastic music the soundtrack to life in the Tuléar region. All that coming up on the topic story. But first, let's hear more from the group Misea.
Okay, so that's a little taste of what you can find on on afropop.org. I should mention that this show comes from a period in our history when we were getting funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities to work with scholars, ethnomusicologists, historians, various scholars to use music to tell deeper stories about history and culture and how the world became the way it is. And we had that funding for 11 years, and there's a section of the website that has all those shows. It's called Hip Deep, which was a phrase coined by Ned Sublett, who I mentioned earlier in connection with Cuba. Hip Deep was a really a rich period for us. We learned so much, and we were funded to travel with the connections that came from people who had devoted their whole lives to studying, you know, whether it was Egyptian music or Nigeria. We went to Egypt, Angola, Nigeria, Ghana, Mali, Madagascar, Lebanon, which is a bit outside our normal range, but fascinating. Other places. It's a tremendous resource for people, and many university professors use those shows in their courses, assign them, because it's a great way to learn history. So I had to mention Hip Deep. Now I'm going to take you inside some more direct experiences with musicians, because being in these situations and meeting and recording these musicians is really the greatest high, other than playing with them. I'm going to start with an artist that I recorded during the time when I was living in Mali with Jelimadi Tunkara, writing in griot time. At that time, this guitarist was a young up-and-comer protege named Boubacar Badian Jabate, and I'll just mention quickly here that it's also the current release on my label, Lion Songs Record, is a recording that I made of him in New York a few years ago. And if you think he's great in what I'm about to show you, it's even better now. But note the technique here. Note especially the picking finger, the way that he's using his finger stretched out straight like a flat pick. If you play guitar, you'll see that this is a very unusual way to play, and it produces incredible results with just two fingers, thumb and forefinger. Here it is. So if you want to hear more of that, visit lionsongsrecords.com and order yourself a copy of this CD. It's really spectacular. Okay, next up. Okay, see, I don't actually have a preview here, but I think I know what this is. This is also Mali. This is from 2016, and this is kind of when we were doing a program about how kids learn. And these are two really young musicians playing the balafone, the wooden slatted xylophone, and well, it speaks for itself. I'm going to pause this here for time because I see that we're getting on an hour here. But yeah, extraordinary talent. Okay, no, you guys, okay, hold on here. So the next thing I'm going to show you is very different. This is from Egypt in 2011, shortly after the Tahrir Square uprising, before any of the elections. We did a series of 5 hip deep shows there. And one of the greatest moments was going to a Sufi saint celebration where this singer was singing. This is at like 2 a.m. in a public square in a town in Upper Egypt, Muhammad Tahami, and basically he is improvising melodies to Sufi poetry. And there's a long story about why it has to be improvised, that it's blasphemous if you compose to words from the Quran or the great Sufi saints, but if you improvise, that's okay. It's fascinating. But anyway, check this scene out. It's really simple. Okay.
Unbelievable.
What's that?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this next one, because this is just a radical contrast of what you can find in Egypt. I don't know if you can still find this publicly right now because things are really clamped down there now. But this is a gathering of youngsters coming to see heavy metal music. Well, you can just imagine how that would go down in a very conservative Islamic society. Egypt is a really interesting place, but very, very troubled. But it was amazing to see that underground scene existed. Now I'm going to take you to Zimbabwe, my great passion, and I could go on and on about the mbira and its religious significance and all kinds of things, but I'm just going to let you see the instrument played in an informal rural setting, and then let you see a bit of Thomas Mapfumo and the Blacks Unlimited and how they adapted it. So here's a little country jam with mbira. Come on. Come on. Oh no, come on. I don't know why. Oh no, okay. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so now I'm going to go forward and let you see Thomas Mapfumo in action in that same year, 1997. Now, what we're going to see here, you'll notice that this concert is taking place in daylight, and that's not because it's a daytime concert. It's because they've been playing since 8:30 the night before, and the sun has risen. And literally, I mean, they just play marathon concerts in those days, and 4 or 5 nights a week. Now, this was an unusually long one. It was an Easter concert. That's why it went right till sunrise. But they typically played until 3:30 in the morning, starting at 8:30. And you know, it creates a kind of just synergy and machine-like tightness in a band that nothing else will do. And the recording is a little crusty. You can't always hear everything well. And Thomas has a habit of walking, and he had trouble hearing in one ear, so he'd walk in front of the speaker and put his ear right into the speaker to sing. But think of this: these artists and this crowd have been going for literally like 10 hours when this happens. And here's a little taste of that. No, come on, here we go. Yeah, I'm not too happy with the controls here, but anyway, here we go. Okay, so that's the end of that section of the the presentation. Boy, I'll tell you, to be with that band, I went to like 75 of those concerts during the 6 months I lived there in 97, 98, and nothing like it. Unfortunately, a lot of those guys have passed away. It's a very hard life, but that's my my take on Afropop Worldwide. And as I say, if there's interest, I can go deeper on any of those subjects in a future thing. I just want to end by playing a little for you. And for that, I'm going to switch to this camera and pull out my guitar. God, my hands are all sweaty. I don't know how this will go, but well. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of what I've picked up I do a show. I've done it at Bar Bess a few times called the Guitar Tour of Africa, where I just kind of play pieces from a lot of different places. You saw Bajan with this business. I mean, learning that in Mali completely changed the way that I approach the guitar. Because it's a very strong, when you can get the whole torque of that finger, you can get, you can, So that's a short version of a song called Kulanjan, which is a praise song to hunters. And okay, I'll just play you one more quick thing to talk about Zimbabwe. One thing you probably notice being musicians is that there's a lot of interplay between 4/4 time and 6/8 time in this music, and it's the way that they so seamlessly interact that makes the magic of a lot of different African music, and there's so many ways of doing it. In Zimbabwe, an Mbira tune will often start out sounding almost like a waltz. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to play you a version of Nemo Musasa, which is a sort of bedrock Mbira piece, using, if I was going to do the full presentation, there would be a lot of stuff with flat pick and using this kind of muted sounds to get the sound of the Mbira, but I want to just focus on this rhythmic thing, so I'm going to use the Mali and finger technique. But so this is sort of something like how the piece would start. And you might notice it's a sequence of 4 phrases. 2, 3, 4. And there'll come a point where the rhythm will shift. Into 4/4. But the 3 can still be there. Listen to the bass. One thing they say about Mbira songs is that they never really end. You just kind of join in for a while. And the song keeps going. So, okay, so that's basically what I have for you, and I'd be happy to take some questions in what little time we have left.
Eddie, can you hear me? This is Dave Liebman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic, man. Great show. And, you killing too, my friend. You're okay. Learned a lot from those brothers.
Thanks.
I'm just wondering if you had any experience with Dimi, singer from Mauritania.
Oh, Dimi Mint Abba. No direct experience, but her. Okay, so that's griot music from Mauritania, a very extraordinary, powerful music. She's passed on, but there is a singer who is related to her. I'm not going to get right exactly how she's related. She's a niece or perhaps even a daughter by a different husband. But her name is Noura Mint Semali, and she has played in New York a number of times. She's a rare exponent of that tradition who does what the Malian griots do, which is to play out to the world. Most Mauritanian griots just perform their traditional role. They don't seem to be interested in making albums or playing in European concert halls or that. But this singer, Noura Mint Semali, is equally phenomenal to Dimi Mentaba in terms of the power of her voice, and her guitarist husband is just a total knockout. And she tours and records and is absolutely. She's been at Central Park Summer Stage and a few other venues in New York. I'm sure when things get rolling again, she'll be back, and you should look out for her.
Well, Dimi, I guess the mother, you might say, but she, talking about her singing, we spent some time together, and this woman smoked a pack of Chesterfields in like one night. And she was a funky chick, man. She was great vibe.
Yeah.
Very popular because the guy was in Paris. We were in a hotel, staying there, and the ambassador came, the United Nations guy came in, and they all like get down on the ground on the floor. She was like eating, and she was big woman. She was eating and she was smoking them cigarettes, man. And, you know, we got her to go to Paris with the concert together. But I think she's you're saying very deep, very heavy shit. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a great sort of blues vibe in that kind of singing. It's really, with all the bent notes and just incredibly powerful delivery. Yeah, beautiful. Any other thoughts, questions?
Henning, Verna Gillis is with us. Do you know her?
Who?
Verna Gillis.
Oh, Verna. Yes, I didn't recognize you. How are you? Nice to see you.
Well, Verna, it's Dave Liebman.
I said I'm vertical. I build on that.
Wow.
Hey, Dave. Hi, everyone. Hey,
nice to see you.
It's great.
Hey, Berna.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Berna.
Hey.
Sean's here too. He says hello.
Thank you.
And Danny,
yes.
Anybody ever jump in and play a horn of some sort?
Excuse me?
Anybody in your experiences, did you see at times, I'm sure it happened once in a while, but just somebody to get up with a horn, you know, like I play saxophone. If I was sitting there, I would be on the stage as soon as I could get a chance to. Did you ever see any, you know, as a regular thing, or just sitting in, what kind of horn, or just trumpet, was it oboe?
I've had some great moments of being invited on stage to play with people. It can be nerve-wracking, even with Thomas, who I've known so well. You know, he's really he's a tough cookie on stage, man. And if anything's not right, you know, things are too loud or whatever, his hearing's a little funny, you have to be incredibly tuned in to where he's at every moment. It hasn't always been a picnic playing with him, but boy, when it works, it's fantastic. And I should mention I play with this two groups, but one that's really in New York, Timbila, where we adapt Timbira music and also music from Mozambique, which is where the name Timbila comes from. It's a particular xylophone from Mozambique with the great Nora Balaban, who some of you will know. And we expect to start playing again now that things are opening up. So if you'd like to be on our list, just send me an email at banning@afropop.org, and hopefully we'll be appearing places soon. But it's a really fun group. We take a lot of liberties with the music, but the core musicians have really studied the traditional stuff deeply. So it's both adventurous and true to the tradition at the same time.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Don't mean to interrupt. I came here late, but on the subject of rhythm, which you were touching on before, that what I was hearing in terms of what you're doing sounded to me sort of like what they kind of call African 12/8, where you can go between 12/8, 4 beats and with groupings of 3, 6 beats with groupings of 2, or
yep.
3 groups with 3 beats with groupings of 4. And is that what you were sort of generally talking about, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a Western way of explaining that we can relate to. Most of the musicians in Africa don't necessarily think in those terms. Some of the younger, more modern ones do, but it's there. And what's really interesting to me is how many different ways you can do it. Like the way they do it in Madagascar as opposed to the way they do it in Zimbabwe or in Mali. Very different, But yes, it does all come down to that exact simple math, that 12 can be divided all these different ways. And yeah, it's beautiful. And I find it to be one of the most satisfying things in the world. It's challenging, but once you get comfortable with it, boy, it just feels great to be able to sort of ride, in between those feels. It's a wonderful thing.
Well, the thing that was funny to me watching the last video there was it was actually making me think of the Grateful Dead. And,
that's not off point really. His followers were definitely like Deadheads. They would travel around the country.
I'm an old school Deadhead. I remember those concerts back in the 60s, man. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But the thing that was happening with the Dead to me that is kind of hard to explain, along with a lot of other things in the 60s, is that these guys with really no significant background could sort of channel some of that African 12/8 and some things they did. I'm not sure they had a damn clue of what they were doing, but they were doing it nonetheless.
Yeah, I think so, especially around the Anthem of the Sun period.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think Phil Lynch has something to do with that because he had a lot of background in jazz and stuff, but that's a whole other topic we can discuss some other time.
No, it's a good one. I always felt that the Dead had in some ways set me up for loving African music. Also, the way Garcia had that clean guitar tone, you know. I actually once, the only time I ever met Jerry Garcia was when he was coming out of a hotel in Boston, and I had kind of stalked him to give him a cassette of guitar music, of African guitar music, and I asked him if he'd ever listened to it, and he, I don't know if you guys know Henry Kaiser, guitarist,
Yes.
character. He was a friend of Garcia's, and he said, "Oh yeah, Henry Kaiser always give me this stuff." He says, "Well, I don't think they were doing anything guitarists weren't doing in the '40s." And I thought, oh boy, I would love to have that conversation, but it never happened.
On a quick aside, my good Jerry Garcia, and I met Jerry on several occasions. I actually sat at his feet at the Electric Circus and copped as many licks as I could back in '68. But again, that's a whole other story. We can talk about some
no
other time.
doubt, no doubt.
Hey, excuse me, guys. I'm just to jump in real quick. My name is Richard Scott. That email, because you guys play in New York City, you said too. You play around New York.
Yeah.
What was that email? I missed that email real quick.
Oh, it's banning at Afropop. I'll put it in the chat here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just to me say hello. I'm a guitarist. I do mostly studio stuff, but I'm just throwing that in real quick. But I'll come check you guys out.
Send me a message and ask to be on the list, and I will. I'll make sure you hear about it next time we do something.
Banning is a long-time read of Guitar Player, and I go back to '67. I remember some of your articles, man. They were really cool.
Oh yeah, cool. Right. Guitar Player was they were quite open-minded at one point, but that came to an end. There wasn't enough expensive gear involved, you know.
Hey, Banning, Sylvain here.
Yeah.
Hey,
how are you?
Yes, good. I had to kind of go in and out of the presentation, but everything I heard was very interesting. As I know, I've known you a long time, and I have a question about since not too many people have dug in so many different African traditions as you have. So I was wondering if you see some kind of a common thread among all of them.
Well, the ones that I'm most attracted to, certainly that rhythm thing we were just talking about, that play of 12/8 and you know, all its permutations. That's one thing that's kind of a thread through the music that I've learned to play. Also, obviously the guitar focus. I don't know. It's really hard to generalize about it. There are so many different charms that each style has, but there's a kind of immediacy and intensity of expression. You know, I mean, there's a part in my book about Mali and griot time where Jelamati is talking about character and how when you play you have to project this sense of character. You can't do anything that's like weak and sort of, you know, half-hearted, and that's really something I've wrestled with as a player, you know. And I always think of it when I see these incredible artists, you know, it's just that total commitment to the performance, you know, that's there's nothing casual about it, you know, and yet it's not forced. It's this sort of. And, you know, I think of that as one of the things that carries through from African music into American folk, and whether it's blues or all the things that, you know, flow from there. It's that intensity, that total commitment to the performance. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this movie now, Summer of Soul, that's just out now. Boy, really made me think of that. Its performances in that are just unbelievable.
I was at the one with Sly and the Family Stone, by the way.
Yeah, it's so great.
Oh, Banning, let me say, I don't have a question, but I'm just thinking about parallels over the years where things here in the States were sort of mirroring or parallel development what happened in Africa. I'm thinking about the early years of Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah.
They called it kalimba, but certainly Maurice White in the early years, especially when his first time at Columbia, was using the kalimba on a lot of stuff.
Yep.
I played in a Brazilian band, oh goodness, from about 81 to 85, and we were often said we sound parallel to Sunny Ade. When I heard some of the stuff that Sunny Ade was doing, I saw some stuff, yeah, but distinct, but I saw the commonalities too. So yeah, it's interesting how these vibes, man, the universal vibe is happening all over the world, man.
Yeah. Well, Sunny Ade's music is very interesting because it's really a hybrid music. It's a whole story of the 20th century that's wrapped into that music, and something I've just been learning about recently. You mentioned Brazil, that a lot of people who were taken as captives to Brazil actually returned to Nigeria. And there's a whole community in Lagos that traces themselves back to that history. So that's one thing we don't think about a lot.
Pas de fruits.
We don't think about that so much, that the idea that Africans went to the New World and then came back to Africa and brought, so this conversation across the Black Atlantic has been going on a lot longer than most of us think. It's really woven into the whole history of the the entire period of contact.
And you may have gotten into it, but obviously missionaries and their hymns had some kind of impact, probably, where pitch is concerned.
Oh yeah, huge, yeah. Vocal polyphony, South Africa and many places, Kenya, owes a lot to that.
Just one other thing, I'm hog the mic here. Did anyone discuss the idea that the sort of unspoken major contribution of Africa in the last 100 years is the sort of injection of the rhythm section as a necessary component to pretty much all music that's not made in a school. So, the idea of a bass, drums, keyboard, guitar, whatever it might be, on some way, in some sense or another, that comes into America from Africa one way or the other, maybe through Latin America or what have you, but it's African in origin. It's the African rhythmic language that has been the biggest single influence in the last 100 years in that indirect way.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of African musicians and musicians everywhere will tell you, that all music comes from Africa, all humanity comes from Africa, and it seems like a truism, but there are many ways to prove that, including the one you just described. I mean, it's and then in a way that's been one of the sort of themes that have run through all the work we've done at Afropop, is just that the story, the more you dig into it, the more complex and interesting it becomes, and the more you realize how interconnected all these things are. And it's really hard for us to appreciate that when we really only have 100 and some years of actual recordings, and not that much literature or notation even that describes anything, going back further than that. But then when you think that this has been going on for thousands of years, and certainly, in the case of Africa, communicating with the world in a big way, since the 14th century, and it's really, really a lot to wrap your brain around. You can spend your life doing it, but it's worth it.
I just think that, the thing that, white people have done a lot of stuff with harmony and with form and with orchestration, and they get all gold stars for that. But the things that white people haven't really gotten very deep with at all relative to other cultures, and, that sort of polyrhythmic mindset of the African tradition is to me, one of the areas that, music in white land has some place to go, so to speak, because it hadn't been there yet.
That's right. I mean, it's really it's the hardest thing about learning the music. I mean, I've experienced this myself, and I've experienced it when teaching people what I know. Is always the hard. You can meet really talented musicians who just have all kinds of chops and fingerings and play really fast and all that. But to understand those rhythms and to be comfortable with them is a huge hurdle, because we just don't get trained in that, yeah, it's I was interviewing a really great Congolese guitarist in the UK last week, and he's a teacher. He's one of the people who teaches in this world music method thing that I mentioned earlier. And I just wanted to sort of confirm my impression. I said, what's the hardest thing about teaching Westerners? And he says, rhythm, right off the bat. Yeah, okay.
But the people that are native to this tradition learn it from a young age without any schooling, and they can just speak with it. And it's totally understood, and it's amazing. It was amazing to me as a white person who went to school and did all the stuff you're supposed to finally have this moment, this aha moment. I was like, holy shit, there's like 6-year-olds in Africa that can kick my ass, and they haven't even been to school yet. So it's something I take, whatever I do or don't accomplish with it in this life, is something I take definitely very seriously, because
there's all kinds of schooling, man. Let's face it.
Oh yeah, exactly. And it starts with the baby on mama's back, a lot of times there, it's you're right. It's deeply ingrained. Even people who aren't musicians, I mean, the way they dance, the way everything. It's a whole education.
There was a movie called Dame La Mana made about a social club in New Jersey, it was primarily Latino, but I think it was Wednesday night, everyone would show up and there'd be a band, but people from the audience would start joining in with this band. And these were people who like washed dishes or drove cabs or whatever. And they could jump in on all these polyrhythms like it was nothing. It totally, right. And that of course you can't even find this damn movie. It's like disappeared off the face of the earth. But
dear, not even on the internet. Well, that's really disappearing.
Yeah, really, exactly.
Yeah.
There's one thing I like to share is with my experience with African music and African musicians is when I played over there or here or in Japan or in Europe, is that when I play with African musicians, regardless what country they are from, they don't look at me what skin color I have, what religion. They just take me, when I see them for the first time, it was with Salif So, with Baba Mal and all these guys. They just look at me and invited me to play without asking me from what school did I graduate, do I know the song? They just said, come on, let's play. And while playing with these gentlemen, real gentlemen, I really felt like they took me as I am. And they, even when I was grooving differently, I mean, my background is Iran, so the 6/8 of Iran is totally different from African 6/8, but it's 6/8. And somehow it works out just by respecting each other and listening to each other. And when I talked with Salif and with Masamba Diop, who's a tama player with Baba Mal, I said, why did you accept me? They said, you are big. And I said, what do you mean with you? You are so big. You have what we like about musicians, about music. You have it. Just looking at you, you are music. And I almost cried. I mean, I've never had this experience here in New York, playing with so-called Afro-American musicians. They always look at me, who is this guy? Where's he coming from? Where does he belong to? When they know that I played with Ornette Coleman, already people don't like me because I have an association with Ornette. But Africa, it can be North Africa. I mean, my favorite place is Mali, Senegal, the western part of Africa. This is what I really love about it. And all my respect, Benny, with all you as a white man, going all the way and learning and sharing and getting it back to America. And the same with Sylvain Leroux. all the respect. I mean, you have done a lot for the African continent, and I hope that you get a Grammy as soon as possible without kissing your ass. I mean, this is what I like about Africa: the openness, the welcomeness, no judging. I mean, everything that is so bad in America in the music scene, you don't have it there.
Yeah, it's very interesting how different it is playing with African musicians in Africa as opposed to here. That whole, what you're describing, that openness, that communality, that sense that music is to be shared, and also that the fact that you, especially what I was found is that in the settings where I wanted to learn, that's taken as a kind of a compliment, and it invites a lot of warmth. Whereas if you're the white guy playing with an African band in the U.S., everyone's kind of looking at you sideways. What, is this guy for real? You know, it's a very different thing. But you know, I mean, the place where I had, you know, where it was the most difficult was in Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe has a very tough racial history. I mean, it's a place where a lot of episodes in recent times have really whipped up racial tension, both during the liberation struggle and since when Mugabe was, like, you know, a terrible racist and really said incredibly racist things all the time. And it created an environment where you know, and I mean, the way it really struck me the most is when I first went there to stay for a long time in 1997. The first time I went to one of Thomas's shows, I had a lot of people coming up to me. It's like, the question that stuck in my mind was always, when are you leaving? The introduction. You know? And but once they started to see me up on the stage playing actual, you know, traditional music, it was just night and day. Suddenly I was everybody's hero, and everybody wanted to kiss me and buy me a drink and whatever, you know, and you know, that transformation was fascinating to me, you know, because, you know, there's one thing about the way the musicians treat you and react, but then there's also the way the audience reacts, and that can be a whole other thing. That's a big subject.
Good. I mean, we're approaching 7:40.
Yeah.
Benning, you already offered your service for another time or many more times.
I'd be happy to do it again, and you know, it'd be really interesting to hear what people might want to hear about. You know, I mean, I can talk in detail about, you know, Mali or Zimbabwe or Congolese music's a big subject we didn't even touch on, or I can do my performance, the guitar tour of Africa. You know, there's lots of possibilities. So if people have, you know, things that they'd like to hear about, you know, let us know. And
good.
Just to interject again, I like to see that guitar tour of Africa.
Yep. Okay, I'll get practicing. I'm a little rusty on it.
That's okay. I'm a guitarist too. I know what it means to be rusty sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
I'm not long enough to warm up nowadays myself, man. So I hear you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to see that. Yep.
All right. Well, maybe that's what we'll do next time. Yeah.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. This is my first time.
Manny.
Thank you very much. This is the first time trying out all this tech. It seemed to work pretty well, except for the controls on PowerPoint. They're too small. But,
one more thank you to Adam as
yes,
the host and also the technical assistant. So
Yeah.
Speaking of the next Music is Essential series, I'm planning to have a presentation of shakuhachi music, Japanese music, in the near future. And also now for us musicians, we are still in deep shit. I mean, things are opening up. I don't believe the hype, and many musicians are asking me and MFM, what should we do? And I think I have a lawyer who knows about copyright ownership, copyrights, and so this is another thing I would like to produce in the near future. So thank you very much, everybody. Let's keep in touch, and don't make it so hard for me to get you to our MFM Zoom webinars. I worked 3 days and I expected more people, but this is recorded, so it will be on our website. So anybody who couldn't show up or was late, you have a chance to see the whole webinar online.
So quality, not quantity, man.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Banning.
Yeah, everybody be safe, be well, and be cool, man.
Be well, everybody.
Great,
Okay.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.